3 minutes after I picked up the microphone, my sister's perfect life began to fall apart. The ballroom had been filled with laughter only seconds earlier. Crystal chandeliers reflected off champagne glasses, a string quartet played softly in the background, and nearly 200 guests, business executives, family friends, and local politicians, were celebrating what Emily called the happiest night of our lives. Then the projector behind me lit up. The first photograph appeared on the screen. It wasn't a vacation picture. It wasn't an anniversary memory. It was a picture of my 70-year-old father quietly eating dinner alone beside the hotel kitchen door because my own sister had decided he wasn't important enough to sit with her wealthy guests. The room fell silent. Someone dropped a wine glass. Emily's confident smile disappeared. She whispered my name through clenched teeth. "Claire, don't." But after 28 years of watching my parents sacrifice everything for us, I wasn't about to stay quiet anymore. By the end of that evening, Emily would lose the respect she had spent years buying. Her husband would discover the secret she'd hidden from him since the beginning of their marriage. And the people she had tried so hard to impress would walk away from her without saying goodbye. Some people believe revenge is about making someone suffer. They're wrong. The best revenge is letting the truth arrive exactly when the lies have become too heavy to carry. My name is Claire Dawson. I'm 32 years old, and I work as an emergency room nurse in Columbus, Ohio. Most days, my job reminds me how fragile life really is. I've watched complete strangers risk everything to save the people they love. I've seen husbands refuse to leave their wives' hospital beds for days. I've watched exhausted parents sleep in uncomfortable waiting room chairs because they couldn't imagine being anywhere else while their child fought for another chance. Those moments taught me something my older sister, Emily, never seemed to understand. Real love isn't measured by money. It's measured by sacrifice. I grew up in a small town just outside Columbus with parents who never had much, but somehow always found a way to give us everything we needed. My father, Robert Dawson, repaired delivery trucks for nearly 40 years. His hands were permanently rough from grease, cold winters, and thousands of hours spent under engines. My mother, Linda, worked mornings at a grocery store before cleaning office buildings at night. Between them, they worked almost every day of the year. Not because they loved working, because they loved us. When I was 12, I asked Dad why he never bought himself a new truck. He smiled without looking up from the engine he was fixing. "Because every dollar I save today becomes another opportunity for you girls tomorrow." At the time, I didn't understand what he meant. Years later, I would. Emily was 3 years older than me. Growing up, she wasn't cruel. She was simply different. She wanted the newest clothes before anyone else. She hated shopping at discount stores. If another girl had something expensive, Emily wanted something even better. Mom used to laugh and call it a phase. Dad would simply say, "She'll learn what's really important someday." I believed him. We all did. None of us realized that someday would never come. For a long time, Emily looked like every proud older sister. She braided my hair before school. She defended me from neighborhood bullies. She even helped me practice spelling words at the kitchen table while Mom worked her evening shift. If someone had told me back then that we'd one day become strangers, I would have laughed. But people rarely change overnight. They change one small decision at a time. The first real change came when Emily left for college. She quickly discovered that appearances opened doors. She started surrounding herself with students from wealthy families, people who spent more on a weekend trip than my parents earned in a month. At first, it was harmless. She asked Mom not to pack homemade lunches because they looked cheap. Then she stopped inviting our parents to campus events. Later, she stopped mentioning where she grew up altogether. Whenever someone asked about her family, she would smile and change the subject. Mom noticed. She never said anything. Instead, she mailed Emily care packages every month. Homemade cookies, handwritten letters, gift cards she could barely afford. Every package ended with the same sentence. "No matter where life takes you, you'll always have a home here." Emily rarely replied. Dad pretended it didn't bother him. "It means she's busy," he'd say. I knew he was lying to himself. Years passed. I graduated from nursing school, thanks entirely to my parents. The tuition bills had been impossible for our family. I later discovered how they managed to pay them. Dad sold the restored 1968 Mustang he had spent nearly 15 years rebuilding. It had been his dream car since he was a teenager. I still remember the empty spot in our garage where it used to sit. When I cried and apologized, Dad wrapped me in a hug. "A car is just metal," he whispered. "Watching my daughter chase her dream is worth 1,000 Mustangs." Mom made sacrifices too. She quietly picked up extra cleaning shifts without telling anyone. Some nights she didn't get home until after midnight. She'd sleep 4 hours, wake up smiling, and ask how my classes were going. Not once did she complain. Not once did she make me feel guilty. Everything they did came from love. Meanwhile, Emily's life looked like something from a magazine. She married Richard Carter, a successful real estate developer from one of the wealthiest families in Central Ohio. Their wedding was featured in a local lifestyle magazine. Their home had 6 bedrooms, a wine cellar, and an indoor theater. Emily posted photos of designer handbags, luxury vacations, and charity galas almost every week. Mom proudly shared every picture with the neighbors. "Look how well she's doing," she'd say. Dad smiled every time. Neither of them noticed one heartbreaking detail. Emily never posted a single picture with them. Not one. At first, we assumed she was simply busy. Then the excuses became harder to ignore. When Dad turned 70, Emily canceled at the last minute because of a business dinner. When Mom had minor surgery, Emily sent flowers instead of visiting. At Christmas, she started mailing expensive gifts instead of coming home. Every gift came with a printed card. No handwritten message. No phone call. No love. Still, my parents defended her. "She's building a life," Mom would say. "We shouldn't make her feel guilty." I wanted to believe that too. Then, one Saturday afternoon, Emily called with exciting news. She and Richard were celebrating their 10th wedding anniversary with a black tie gala at the Grand Wellington Hotel. Nearly 200 guests had been invited. Business partners, city officials, friends, family. "It'll be the biggest event we've ever hosted," Emily said proudly. Mom was so excited she cried after hanging up. For the next 3 weeks, she poured her heart into making the most meaningful gift she had ever created, a handmade scrapbook filled with childhood photographs, handwritten memories, birthday cards, report cards, and tiny notes Emily had written as a little girl. Every page told the story of a daughter who had once adored her parents. Dad secretly bought Emily a delicate gold bracelet after overhearing her admire it in a jewelry store months earlier. When I saw the price tag, I nearly stopped him. "Dad, you don't need to spend this much." He smiled. "I know. But every father hopes his little girl will remember how much she's loved." I wish that hope had been enough. Because none of us had any idea that the anniversary gala wasn't going to celebrate family. It was going to reveal exactly who Emily had become. The evening of the anniversary gala arrived with clear skies and a warm autumn breeze. Mom spent nearly an hour deciding which dress to wear. She finally chose the navy blue one Dad had given her for their 35th anniversary. "It's not too old-fashioned, is it?" she asked me for the 3rd time. "You look beautiful," I answered honestly. Dad had his only dark suit pressed the day before. He even polished the same black shoes he'd worn to my nursing school graduation. Watching them get ready broke my heart. Not because they looked out of place. Because they looked so excited. They truly believed this night was about celebrating family. When we arrived at the Grand Wellington Hotel, photographers stood outside the entrance while luxury cars pulled up one after another. Inside, everything looked breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers stretched across the ceiling. White roses decorated every table. A live string quartet played near the dance floor. Waiters carried silver trays filled with champagne as guests laughed and greeted one another. Mom quietly squeezed Dad's hand. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Dad smiled. Our little girl did all this. Emily spotted us from across the ballroom. For a moment, I expected her to run over and hug our parents. Instead, she walked toward us with a practiced smile, the kind people wear for cameras, not family. You made it, she said. Mom opened her arms for a hug. Emily gave her a quick one-sided embrace before immediately looking around to see who might be watching. Then her eyes landed on the scrapbook in Mom's hands. Oh, you brought a gift. Mom's face lit up. I made it myself. It has pictures from the day you were born all the way to your wedding. I thought maybe you'd like to look through it tonight. Emily forced a smile. I'm sure it's sweet. She waved over one of the event assistants. Take this to the storage room with the other gifts. The assistant reached for the scrapbook. Mom hesitated for just a second. I thought maybe we could look at it together later. Emily didn't even look at her. We'll see if there's time. As the assistant disappeared with the scrapbook, I caught a glimpse of Mom's smile fading. Dad stepped forward with a small velvet jewelry box. We also found something you mentioned liking a while back. Emily opened it. Inside was the delicate gold bracelet. For less than 3 seconds, she stared at it. Then she quietly closed the box. Thanks. That was it. No hug. No appreciation. No excitement. She handed the bracelet to another employee as casually as if it were a business receipt. Before anyone could say another word, the wedding planner approached Emily. Mrs. Carter, your VIP guests have arrived. Emily's entire expression changed. There they are. She smiled brightly and hurried toward a group of wealthy investors entering the ballroom. We stood there alone. Mom watched Emily laugh with complete strangers while forgetting the people who had given her everything. Dad gently cleared his throat. She's busy. He tried to sound cheerful, but I could hear the disappointment hiding behind every word. A few minutes later, guests began finding their assigned seats. An employee walked over holding 4 place cards. Mr. and Mrs. Dawson? Dad smiled. That's us. The employee looked uncomfortable. I'm sorry. He glanced around before lowering his voice. There was a last-minute seating adjustment. He pointed toward a tiny table beside the ballroom service entrance. The table sat directly next to swinging kitchen doors where waiters carried dirty dishes in and out every few minutes. Meanwhile, every other family member, including distant cousins Emily barely spoke to, was seated near the stage. Mom looked confused. There must be some mistake. The employee sighed. I'm only following instructions. I looked across the room. Emily was standing near the head table, laughing with Richard and several wealthy guests. She noticed us looking. Instead of seeming embarrassed, she simply nodded toward the small table, as if this had been her plan all along. I walked straight across the ballroom. Emily. She turned, still smiling for the people around her. Claire, isn't everything beautiful? No. Her smile faded. What do you mean? You put Mom and Dad beside the kitchen. She shrugged. The front tables are reserved. They're your parents. They're also not investors, she replied quietly. They don't exactly fit the image Richard and I are trying to present tonight. For a second, I couldn't believe what I'd heard. You think your own parents ruin your image? Emily folded her arms. Lower your voice. I'm protecting our reputation. I stared at her in disbelief. No, Emily. You're sacrificing the people who built your life, just to impress people who barely know your name. She looked me straight in the eye. If they feel embarrassed, maybe they should have tried harder in life. The words hit me like a slap. Across the room, I saw Mom pretending not to notice the kitchen staff brushing past her chair every few minutes. Dad kept smiling, but his eyes never left the empty seat beside the stage where parents were supposed to sit. That was the exact moment I stopped hoping Emily would apologize. Because I finally understood something. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't stress. It wasn't poor planning. It was a choice. And she had no idea that before this night was over, every choice she'd spent years hiding was about to be exposed. I wish I could tell you that I immediately marched onto the stage after hearing those words. I didn't. Not yet. Because revenge without proof is just anger. And anger disappears. The truth doesn't. 2 weeks before the anniversary gala, Dad had called me on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Claire, he said, do you have a few hours to help me clean out the garage? I drove over thinking we'd be organizing old tools. Instead, we spent the afternoon opening dusty storage boxes that hadn't been touched since my grandfather passed away. Grandpa William Dawson had owned a successful construction company before retiring. He wasn't flashy, but he had invested wisely for decades. When he died, he left behind a sizable family trust, money meant to help future generations with education, emergencies, and retirement. Dad had never cared much about the details. Emily handles all that paperwork now, he told me. She's better with finances than I am. He trusted her completely. While sorting through old files, I found a folder labeled Family Trust, original copies. Curious, I opened it. Several withdrawal forms caught my attention. The signatures looked different. Grandpa's signature had always been neat and steady. These looked stiff, almost like someone had copied them while staring at another document. Dad, I asked, did Grandpa really approve all these transfers before he passed away? Dad adjusted his glasses. I assumed he did. Emily said the lawyer handled everything. Something about it didn't feel right. I quietly took pictures of the documents before putting everything back exactly where I'd found it. The next morning, I called an old college friend, Daniel Brooks, who had become an estate attorney. I didn't accuse anyone. I simply asked if he'd look at the paperwork. 3 days later, Daniel called me. His voice was unusually serious. Claire, you need to come to my office. The moment I walked in, I knew something was wrong. Several documents were spread across his desk. Beside them were enlarged copies of Grandpa's verified signatures. They don't match, Daniel said. I felt my stomach tighten. Are you sure? He nodded. I can't officially call them forged without a formal investigation. But I'd bet my law license they weren't signed by your grandfather. I sat there in complete silence. There's something else, he continued. He turned his computer screen toward me. Over the previous 4 years, nearly $800,000 had quietly disappeared from the trust through a series of small transfers. Never enough to attract immediate attention. Always just small enough to look routine. Where did the money go? I whispered. Daniel clicked another file. My heart nearly stopped. Luxury vacations. Designer purchases. A vacation home in Florida. A company investment made solely in Emily's name. Almost every questionable transfer eventually benefited her. I wanted to believe there had to be an explanation. Maybe Richard knew. Maybe the accountant had made mistakes. Maybe. But every new record pointed to the same conclusion. Emily had been stealing from the very family she claimed to represent. Daniel looked at me carefully. You have 2 choices. You can report this immediately, or gather enough evidence that no one can deny it. I chose the second option. Not because I wanted revenge. Because I knew exactly what Emily would do without undeniable proof. She would deny everything. She would call me jealous. She would convince everyone that I misunderstood the paperwork. Over the next 10 days, Daniel worked with a forensic accountant. Every transfer was traced. Every signature was examined. Every document was verified. The evidence became impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, I watched Emily post glamorous countdown photos for her anniversary gala. Can't wait to celebrate with the people who matter most, one caption read. Every time I saw those words, I thought about Mom staying up past midnight making that scrapbook. About Dad quietly selling pieces of his happiness so his daughters could have a better future. The contrast made me sick. 3 days before the gala, Daniel handed me a thick folder. This is everything, he said. If you give this to the police today, they'll open an investigation. I looked down at the folder. Then I thought about my parents. They had spent years making excuses for Emily. If detectives showed up at her house without warning, Mom would spend the rest of her life wondering whether she could have prevented it. No, my parents deserved the truth first. They deserved to see that none of this was their fault. So I made one final decision. I called Daniel. I need one more favor. He raised an eyebrow. What kind of favor? I want you to attend the anniversary gala. You don't have to say a word unless I ask. But if tonight goes the way I think it will, I'll need someone in that room who can prove I'm telling the truth. Daniel smiled slightly. I'll bring the originals. Standing in that ballroom now, watching my parents eat dinner beside the kitchen while Emily toasted family values from the stage, I realized something. The evidence in my purse wasn't just paperwork anymore. It was a promise. A promise that before this night ended, my parents would never again have to lower their heads because of someone else's shame. And as the master of ceremonies walked toward the microphone with a smile, announcing it was time for the family speeches, I quietly reached into my handbag, wrapped my fingers around the flash drive Daniel had prepared, and stood up from my chair. The ballroom erupted in applause as the master of ceremonies raised his glass. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced with a smile, "before we cut the anniversary cake, we'd like to invite a few family members to share some memories." Emily glanced toward me and smiled confidently. She actually believed I was about to stand there and tell everyone what a wonderful sister she was. I walked calmly to the stage. Every step felt strangely peaceful. Not because I wasn't nervous. Because after years of staying silent, I finally knew I was doing the right thing. The MC handed me the microphone. "Thank you," I said softly. "I won't take much of your time." The room became quiet. I looked across the ballroom until my eyes found my parents sitting beside the kitchen doors. My first thank you tonight isn't for the hosts. It's for the two people who taught me what family actually means. Everyone turned toward Mom and Dad. My father worked through back injuries, freezing winters, and countless 16-hour days so his daughters could have opportunities he never had. My mother spent years cleaning office buildings at night, then came home smiling every morning because she never wanted us to feel guilty for her sacrifices. They taught us that love isn't measured by money. It's measured by what you're willing to give without expecting anything in return. Many guests smiled. Some even applauded. Then I took a slow breath. Which is why my heart broke tonight. The applause faded. I watched those same parents walk into this ballroom carrying a handmade scrapbook filled with decades of family memories. They weren't welcomed. They weren't honored. They were hidden beside the kitchen because someone decided they didn't fit the image of success. The room became so quiet that the sound of silverware touching plates echoed across the ballroom. Emily stood up. "Claire, that's enough." I looked at her. "No, it isn't." I nodded toward the audio-visual technician. "Could you please play the presentation on this flash drive?" Emily's smile vanished. "What presentation?" The technician inserted the drive. The giant screen behind me lit up. The first image appeared. It showed my parents sitting alone beside the service entrance, while every other close relative occupied seats near the stage. Guests immediately began whispering. Several people turned toward Mom and Dad with shocked expressions. Then another photograph appeared. Mom's handmade scrapbook sitting unopened on a dusty shelf inside the hotel's storage room. Mom quietly covered her mouth. She hadn't known. Dad lowered his head. Emily laughed nervously. "This is ridiculous." "She's being dramatic." I calmly answered. "I'm just getting started." The next slide appeared. A copy of Grandpa William Dawson's original trust agreement. Beside it appeared another document. Then another. Highlighted signatures. Highlighted transfers. Highlighted dates. Finally, the screen displayed one simple sentence in large white letters. $782,460 missing from the Dawson Family Trust. The whispers instantly became louder. Richard slowly stood from his chair. He stared at the screen. "What is this?" Emily crossed her arms. "It's fake. It's completely fake." At that exact moment, Daniel Brooks quietly stood from his table near the back of the ballroom. He walked toward the stage carrying a leather briefcase. "My name is Daniel Brooks. I'm an estate attorney licensed in the state of Ohio. I examined every one of these documents." He opened the briefcase and placed several certified copies onto the podium. "The signatures authorizing these withdrawals are not authentic. And every questionable transfer ultimately benefited one person." He slowly looked toward Emily, the current trustee, Emily Carter. The ballroom exploded with shocked whispers. Richard turned toward his wife. "No." He shook his head. "Tell me he's wrong." Emily's breathing became uneven. "Richard, I can explain." Daniel interrupted gently. The forensic accountant also traced payments used to purchase the Florida vacation home solely under Mrs. Carter's ownership. Richard looked as though the floor had disappeared beneath him. "You told me your grandmother left you that money." Emily said nothing. She couldn't. Because every document on the screen proved otherwise. I looked around the ballroom. No one was staring at me anymore. Every eye was fixed on Emily. For the first time in years, she had nowhere left to hide. Emily's hands began to shake. For the first time in her life, there wasn't a perfectly rehearsed answer waiting behind her smile. She looked at Richard, then at the guests, then at my parents. It was as if she was searching the room for anyone who would rescue her. No one moved. Finally, she pointed at me. "She's lying." Her voice cracked. "She's always been jealous of me." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. Instead, I quietly picked up one final envelope from the podium. I hoped I would never have to show this. I handed it to Richard. Inside was a letter written by Grandpa William Dawson only 6 months before he passed away. Daniel had discovered it tucked inside the original trust records. Richard unfolded the letter with trembling hands. His voice was barely above a whisper as he began reading. "If you're reading this, I may no longer be here. My greatest wish isn't that my grandchildren inherit my money. It's that they inherit our family's honesty. Money can always be earned again. Character cannot." The ballroom was silent. Richard continued reading. "If anyone ever uses this trust for personal gain, they are stealing from every future generation of this family, not just from me." He lowered the letter. His eyes filled with disappointment. He looked at Emily as though he didn't recognize the woman he'd been married to for 10 years. "You knew exactly what you were doing." Emily reached for his arm. "Richard, please." He gently stepped back. "No. I defended you every single time someone questioned your decisions. I trusted you. And you built our entire marriage on lies." At that moment, 2 plainclothes detectives entered the ballroom. I had contacted them earlier that afternoon after Daniel confirmed the evidence was complete. One detective approached the stage. "Mrs. Emily Carter?" She didn't answer. "We've reviewed the documentation provided by Mr. Brooks. We need you to come with us to answer questions regarding suspected financial fraud, forgery, and theft from a family trust." A murmur spread across the room. Emily looked toward my parents. Tears filled her eyes. For one brief second, I thought she was finally going to apologize. Instead, she whispered, "You did this to me." Dad slowly stood. His voice remained calm. "No, sweetheart. You did this to yourself." Those 7 words hit harder than anything I could have said. Emily covered her face as the detectives escorted her toward the ballroom doors. No one clapped. No one celebrated. Because despite everything, she was still family. And that truth hurt. As the doors closed behind her, the room remained completely still. Then Richard walked over to my parents. Without saying a word, he removed the 2 reserved place cards from the head table. He carried them across the ballroom. He placed them in front of Mom and Dad. "I owe both of you an apology. I spent years believing appearances mattered. I forgot that character matters more." Mom immediately stood and hugged him. Even after everything that had happened, she chose kindness. Because that's who she had always been. The rest of the evening changed completely. Guests moved their chairs. Conversations shifted. People who had barely spoken to my parents before sat beside them, asking about old family stories, laughing over childhood memories, and thanking them for raising 2 daughters who had once been so different. The expensive decorations suddenly didn't matter. Neither did the crystal chandeliers. For the first time that night, the ballroom actually felt like a family gathering. 6 months later, the court officially removed Emily as trustee of the Dawson Family Trust. The stolen assets that investigators were able to recover were returned to the trust, and the remaining funds were placed under independent professional management so no single family member could ever control them again. Richard filed for divorce a few months later. According to Daniel, he donated a large portion of his settlement to scholarships for nursing students in Grandpa William Dawson's name. He said it felt like the closest thing to making things right. As for me, I went back to working 12-hour shifts in the emergency room. Saving lives still mattered more to me than winning arguments. Dad finally bought himself another project car. Not because he needed one. Because for the first time in years, he allowed himself to spend money on his own happiness. Mom placed the anniversary scrapbook on the coffee table in their living room. Every visitor who came into the house looked through it. Not because it was expensive, because it told the story of a family that had survived the worst kind of betrayal without losing its kindness. The following Thanksgiving, we didn't book a ballroom. We gathered around my parents' old wooden dining table. There were only 10 of us. The turkey was slightly overcooked. The mashed potatoes had too much butter. Dad still insisted on carving the turkey himself, even though it took twice as long as anyone else. Mom laughed so hard she nearly cried when my nephew accidentally dropped an entire dinner roll into the gravy boat. Nobody cared. There were no photographers, no investors, no VIP guests, just people who loved one another. Before we ate, Dad raised his glass. He looked around the table and smiled. You know, I used to think success meant having more. He paused. Now I know success is simply sitting at a table where nobody has to pretend. Everyone quietly nodded, including me. People often think revenge is about humiliation, or anger, or making someone hurt the way they hurt you. But I've learned something very different. Real revenge isn't destroying someone's life. It's refusing to let them destroy your peace. Because lies may build beautiful houses, but only truth can build a home.